Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. So tonight we have almost a full cadre. Directly next to me, Tom Norman.
Good evening, gentlemen, ladies,
How
wherever
are
you
you
may
doing,
be.
Tom?
Doing well, Kevin. Just here to see what's going on and what we might be able to answer tonight.
Taking advantage of the balmy weather.
Oh, yeah.
Raymond says hello. Hello back to you, Raymond. And also still on secret mission somewhere on the globe, Mala Mahadevan.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Hoping to make it worth your time today.
Yeah, we've got some agenda items. Of course, as always, Shop Talk is a chat-driven, viewer-driven show. So if you have questions, we have answers. Some of them may even be correct answers. We'll find out. We'll find out together. It's a learning journey of discovery. So if you have questions, drop them in chat. Otherwise, email shoptalk@tripass.org, and usually I look at that after the streams. Helps us build up some ideas for the next stream. So our first thing I want to talk about is a couple of announcements. This one I'll just do briefly because we went into it in longer form last week. TriPass board elections are coming up. So there are 3 open positions: President, Vice President of Marketing, and Treasurer. If you want to run, talk to me by November 10th. You can email shoptalk@tripass.org, hit me up on Meetup, throw a brick through my window. If you have a brick that you throw through the window, please also include the money to repair the window. I would much appreciate that. And let me know if you want to run for a particular position. We do have incumbents at each position, but all positions are open. Talk to me by November 10th. In addition, the Azure SQL Championship is still going. So, Mala, you are involved with that. Would you like to tell our wonderful viewers all about it?
Yes. Yes, the Azure SQL Championship is a 3-week contest that is being co-run by Microsoft and PASS together. And incidentally, it starts today. You have a series of small exercises, questionnaire. I don't know what the complete detail of everything that they're planning to put out, but it's going to be mainly targeted at people who are relatively new to Azure, and they want to promote people learning and understanding more.
All right, sounds good. I've put a link in chat.
You have to answer a little. Right. You have to answer something every day for 3 weeks, and at the end they have some prizes lined up, and if you're on social media, you also get considerable publicity with it. If you win, the first prize is a free pass to the summit next year, which everybody assumes is going to be an in-person conference. So if that really happens, and everybody hopes that it will, it's considerable savings for you. It's to the tune of $3,000 or $4,000, and there are a couple more prizes lined up after that too. So it's a good way to have some fun and learn as you go, and you will also be supporting PASS by participating in this contest. So hopefully people get some time to do it. And you don't
great.
have to be an expert, you don't have to know everything. That same link has some YouTube videos and the wonderful training series that Bob Ward and Anna Hoffman did. I don't know how many people watched that. It's still out there on YouTube. That's pretty much all you may need to answer everything that you have to. And you can go through all their videos in about 2 to 3 hours. They're extremely well done, very crisp and very informative. And that should be enough learning material to learn. And I'm going to try and see if I can post a link to that too. 1 second.
All right. While Mala's doing that, check out the Azure SQL Championship. Now, on to the show for tonight. So, Mala actually has the first topic, which is all about code review tools. We're pretty familiar with code reviewing from, say, I'll call them general purpose programming languages. there are a lot of linters that are available for C. You have linters for Python. You have code review tools for a variety of different languages. You've got a fairly robust set of testing, of review, of practices, including, say, in C#. For a long time we had FX cop, we had style cop. There are current code practices that are built into Visual Studio. So there's quite a bit of work that's been done in this space. But when it comes to domain-specific languages, you tend to see a lot less of that. And SQL is certainly no exception to that. Nonetheless, Mala's had some experience recently using code review tools in the T-SQL space.
Are we talking about automated tools, or are we talking about manual code reviews?
Now, T-SQL is, I would say it's a semi-automated tool. So 1 second, let me finish this. Go on, Kevin. I'll post this link and then continue with that.
Uh-oh, now I have to vamp.
Learning
Yeah,
series
so,
for as a SQL.
Time to vamp.
So
So
what we are looking at, basically, I started. Go on.
go for it, Mala.
I think we're talking over each other. Go on. No, I was just saying I started exploring these tools because of some, some changes we have at work. We have used Fisheye Crucible as a code review tool for many years at work, and partly the reasons is that they don't want to continue.
Seems like we have some.
One is about trying to automate some aspects of our code review, which is where the SQL T comes into picture, and the other one is to find, if possible, if at all there is, and I am not terribly optimistic about this, if there is any replacement for Fisheye that does what it does and does maybe a little bit more than pull request comparisons, which a lot of people on my team are not enthusiastic about, but is what majority of the world seems to be using for code reviews. But they want what this Fisheye thing has, and I don't know how far we're going to be able to go with that. I'm not sure, but I'm finding some interesting stuff with some of the automated code review stuff, parts of it. Obviously, everything that we do with code reviews cannot be automated. There is stuff that a human has to view and critique about. There is no tool that can replace that entirely. But we are trying to automate some parts of it, which is where I searched and I found an open source tool called T-SQL Lint, which is an interesting tool. It's let me pull up the website for that and post it there.
Yeah, I have the website right here, so I'll share the
Cool.
screen.
So it's developed by some of our friends at salesforce.com, and I was told of its existence by one of them. And it's not that hard to install and give it a try, and it is reasonably well documented, both the install, and you need npm to install the version on a traditional Windows based computer. So I took a little bit of Kevin's help because I'm not familiar with npm, but I managed to get it installed, and then you have to get it to work. It's documented really well. And once you get it to work, you can add a plugin to SQL Server Management Studio using the external tools option, and then it does a bunch of really neat stuff. It can point out places where you use select star. It can point out any case sensitivity that you have. If you want to capitalize all your keywords, it can do that. So there is about a dozen rules that come out of the box with it, which are like fairly easy, and they neat code and avoid very like no.
So with
rules that
Mala's
come with it
connection
out of the
dropping out a little bit, let me walk you through this. This animated image does a pretty good job of explaining several of the rules. Like you can see, it forces capitalization of keywords like select and from,
Yeah.
removing print statements.
Yeah, a link server, multi-table alias, set and CI, set no count, all of that stuff. Good stuff. But if you want to add your own rules, which you can, obviously you have to code for it yourself. You have to attach it to whatever it's doing. And I haven't gone that far personally. I don't even learn that, but I think it's worth it in my opinion. Just given how easy it is to install and use, and all these rules are pretty good rules that they have out there. So that's my opinion on it. I would give it 4 stars out of 5. And
Anders just hates it now. Anders, if you're on chat tonight, you can turn this one off. Yes, this is strictly a linter. That is correct. So this is a static code review tool, and it looks at specific issues that have been predefined, and hopefully audio connection works a little better this time.
so suddenly I got kicked out. I don't know why.
That's all right. So Raymond was saying this is strictly a linter, and yes, absolutely. This is a static code review tool.
Yes. Yes, strictly a linter.
But it looks like you can build your own rules in .NET.
Yes.
What about the code review tool that's in Visual Studio, SQL Server database tools? You can actually go in there and configure.
So the thing about that, I haven't played with that, Tom. The thing is that in our world, most of our DBs are strictly on SSMS. I think one person is using Visual Studio, so for me to go in and they're not going to change how they work for quite some time. So I haven't gone that far with it. But if somebody has, then I really want to hear if that's a good thing, because I read about it.
If it's what I'm thinking about, this is Live Share. Live Share allows you to do pair programming remotely, and also you can do code reviews remotely. So you can watch. You even have the ability to have multiple people come in, and you can have multiple people working on a file at a time. It's kind of interesting because it'll essentially create new files for each person. And then you can merge them together. So,
cool.
It's still fairly early in development. I messed with it a bit, probably about 10 months ago. Not too long before we stopped having in-person meetings, and it was interesting, but was kind of early enough in development that there were some bugs. Especially if you had people in both Visual Studio and VS Code. But, Live Share is a really cool idea. And what happens is that I can say, I want to do a live share, and it'll give me a link that I could share with people. I could just give out this link and set up a collaboration. I had to make sure that I didn't have anything that I didn't want to show anybody. But we can start a session, join a session, and invite participants. So there are some good tie-ins, and that is an extension for Visual Studio Code. It probably will not work with Azure Data Studio, but to be fair, I have not tried. And Raymond says, still using Teams and performing work that way. Yeah, Teams is another option, of course. Classic code review via just sharing my screen. I do a lot of that as well. Live share, I definitely do a lot less of, but I do like it as an idea. So that's T-SQL.
There are a couple of other tools too that Grant Ritchie recommended, one called T-SQL Corp. And I don't know, that's also an open source tool apparently that Redgate is recommending and is integrated with some of Redgate's products. But I tried to download and run it, and it gave me a runtime error during install. It would not install, and that's not seem to be anybody supporting it. So I gave up on that thing. But that is one thing that he suggested to try. And there is one called Visual Expert, which is a paid tool that I've been looking into, which does a bunch of stuff. I mean, the GUI is impressive, but it's not stuff that, at least where I work, it's not stuff that we haven't done on our own, like finding unused procedures and indexes and various kind of stuff. So it does a bunch of stuff, and it gives a really nice, the one feature I liked about it is it gives a nice hierarchy chart with, like, it summarizes your code into, like, this loop calls this, update calls this something. So it's a sort of a diagram, a really neat diagram to get an overview of really complex, large stored procedures and such. That's the one feature about it that I liked. And I don't know if I want to suggest to my boss to buy an expensive tool just for that. But for those who are big into, GUI and such, it may be an interesting tool to explore. And I'll post the link for that in a second.
Okay. Yeah, so Raymond asked, is SQL Cop still supported? And I pulled up the PRs, the pull requests, considering that there are 3 of them currently open and one since July. The last closed pull request was in May. I'm going to gather that it is currently dormant. It may not be dead.
Grant didn't have an answer for me when I asked, like, who's the person on it that I can talk to, because I can't get it to install on my laptop, and he didn't have a clue. So that's a paid tool that I posted there. And so, yeah, that they have a Twitter handle too, which has not been active for a long time. So I don't know.
Yeah, so short answer is maybe it's active. It'd be interesting to see if it's still active. It might be dormant. And this is the paid tool that Mala mentioned.
Yes.
So, generating diagrams.
Now that diagram part I liked. The rest of it, I don't know. It it depends on how badly you want it. So I like the impact analysis and the diagram that is neatly done. I've not seen
it also does
any tool that documents, stored procedures like that. So that part is okay.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
It looks like, it's reasonably similar to some modern web application tools. I'm thinking things like New Relic, especially as soon as I saw this.
Now those things I don't know how much, how useful they can be or how accurate they are. I'll take that with a pinch of salt. But the rest of it, the diagram and such, are okay to me.
Okay.
I mean, how does it measure code performance and such? I don't know really. Maybe it's good. I don't know.
Yeah. No, that's a good question.
Right.
But those are some ideas.
Yeah.
Different sets of tools, obviously serving completely different purposes, but still in the space of understanding your systems and trying to make them a bit better.
Now, what if you have a company that basically has acquired and acquired and acquired and acquired, and in almost every single database that you work with, it basically is different. It's like, the way they name things, the way they capitalize things or whatever. And then you also have those of us that are in a fun entity framework shop. So, you kind of lose a lot of these tools and capabilities.
Possibly. Some of them you may lose, but
for example, in my shop, because we have acquired so many different companies and databases and stuff, each database is a little different. And basically, when I've brought on new people and trained them, I basically have told them, go and follow the pattern of that particular database, because there's no way that I can go restructure some of these databases to all be the same.
Right. Yeah.
The tech debt in the company would not allow something like that to happen.
True. Though it's still possible to say have per database or per instance standards, where you can say, look, here's the stuff that I'd like to see, and try to get there. Here's how it is right now, and you know what? If we're just gonna stick with it right now, I don't want to see it worse. If this is your standard, we're gonna stick with that standard, even if it's not the standard over on this other instance. There's some capacity for configuration, and a lot of this will be more valuable as a development tool rather than on the administrative side, where you're trying to confirm that this is the way things are. On that side, that's where we might be able to talk about policy-based management.
Yeah, and that's what we basically have done, is basically said, follow the standards of that particular database, instead of going out there and say, hey, we're going to try to make everything the same. Because if you start even making a change to try to get to the other one, then you basically have a database that's kind of in between each.
True.
So, and then, like I said, a lot of our SQL code is now going, or has gone, to entity framework and stuff like that. So there's really not any code even in the database per se. So
yeah. Then you get to .NET linters and .NET code review tools, and there's a lot more in that space. Raymond mentions end depends. That's one tool. There are quite a few in this space, open source and covered in Visual Studio.
Correct.
Okay, so as we move to our next topic, before I move to the next topic, I decided to change my mouse color after seeing this image. So I used to use Doxygen for documenting C# code as well. Yeah, I have not used that before. I believe I remember it being an automated documentation tool, and that basically the value you get is absolutely correlated to the amount of effort you put into it. If you just run the thing on an existing code base, the documentation is garbage. But if you put a lot of effort into the documentation, then it can be really good. But it's like the difference between when you find a page on Microsoft Docs where everything's filled in, there are a lot of good examples, you have explanatory comments, you have a lot of detailed text for methods and properties, versus when you find some page that it looks like the last time the code was touched was 15 years ago, and property document, the document used. Like, if that's the entirety of the comment, if that's the entirety of the amount of effort, then yeah, it's not gonna help too much. So it's all in what you do. So change the color, and also I have mouse sonar, which works much better if you make a ping.
I do like Apex SQL Documenter that I've used, and basically gives me a good CHM file that I can pass through to other people. And just as long as you've got your foreign keys and all that stuff in, it does help you go find things that, if you're not very familiar with the database, it does kind of go help you find things, and it shows you objects that depend upon it and objects that reference it. So that's kind of handy to know when you start trying to make changes.
Which one is that, Tom?
Apex SQL Documenter.
Apex. Okay. Yeah, I must add that to my list of. Yeah, because to have a CHM file, especially to me, at least where I am, I think a data dictionary as a CHM file would be incredibly useful. But like Kevin said, that's not something any tool can dish out for you. It requires a tremendous amount of effort.
And
Yeah,
Yeah.
you've got to
Yeah.
put in the time for it, and
Yes.
you get the payoff based on the time.
Right.
All right, so next thing I want to talk
Oh,
about.
did I get knocked off?
Nope, you're still here, Tom. Uh-oh. Tom 2, Return of Tom.
Did I get knocked off this time? So
Maybe so. What's funny is that you were on there. I even heard you ask, "Did I get knocked off?" So apparently, this is a ghost story, and it's going to come from me next. But it's going to come from me by knocking out my internet connection, because that's how it always works. All right.
right.
Next thing. I stopped sharing, but actually I want to share again because I've got what I think is pretty fun. This is called Xenographics. So this is a website that is all about sometimes useful charts. So I found a link to this earlier I think it was late last week, and I put it on Curated SQL. And started looking at some of these. I'm like, actually, this would be fun to talk about for Shop Talk and look at some of the weird graphics. So Tom and Mala have seen a couple of these, but what I want to do is basically pop up a graphic on screen. Anybody in chat, also, please feel free, jump in. Share your thoughts. What do you think when you see the graphic? And is it useful? Can you get a story from it? Can you understand what it's doing? Here's a first one. I'd consider this a pretty easy one.
Yeah, that one's fairly easy. You know, what's someone's opinion or scores or whatever of how well whether they'll advance or not.
Yeah, that's right. This is the win probability during a match. So in this case, it's soccer. I've seen this as well. You see it a lot for American football as well. Like, what is the score at a certain amount of time? Who's got the ball? Are they attacking or defending? And this one shows World Cup. I think this was, what will this be, 2018? I think it's pretty clear. This is actually the type of thing that you would see in the Economist back in the 90s, or the New York Times.
I really like it.
What's that?
I really like it. I think in any situation where there is a binary probability of things going in a win or lose kind of a thing, I think it really gives you a very nice visual overview of which way it can go.
Yeah. Like, for example, you can see, for example, that Brazil dominated Mexico the entire match.
Right.
There was no chance Mexico was coming back. Meanwhile,
right.
Argentina versus France, where it looks like Argentina took a lead for a few minutes, and then France responded, and then France just crushed them at the end.
Right.
So Raymond says, not as clear as some of Ed T's graphics. Yeah, it's not perfectly clear, but this is exactly the type of thing I would expect to see in a magazine during the 90s, in a newspaper, one of the higher end newspapers, and that you'll still see today. You know, I think if you just showed the images without all of the labels, you wouldn't understand. If you showed the images plus the labels, you know, you see Uruguay and Portugal, I could see that as, like, I can understand what's going on, but because this is a newspaper magazine style graphic, they have little comments in here, and I think the comments make a lot of sense. They help people who have not seen the graphic before really understand what's going on with it and get a bit more out of it. So I like that one. I wouldn't use it for everything. It's got to be in a place where you have a lot of screen real estate and where people are willing to kick back and spend some time digging into it. How does it translate for someone with visual impairment? So if you have visual impairment, I think it still translates reasonably well. You know, I would want to check the color contrast, of course, but assuming that there's no color contrast problem, then you can see its relative size So I think that that tells enough of the story by itself. Especially when you add in these little comments here like Croatia advances. All right, well, we can see Croatia moving through here, and you can kind of see this is Croatia's color. So I think that it works well in that regard. Here's the next one. This is a time map, a two-dimensional plot displaying timings between events. And it looks like this is tweets for people. What are your thoughts, Tom and Mala, and chat?
I find it a bit confusing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm picking up more of it now that I'm staring at it, but when I first saw it, I immediately said, I don't like this.
Yeah. I mean, for one thing, where the text overrides the whatever is behind it, business as usual and major event. So if I look at it, I can't see any big difference between those two things, other than that, this one has a bit of yellow in the color behind, and this one is a little bluer. But other than that, I don't know how to interpret this thing at all.
Right.
Very well.
Yeah, I completely agree with Raymond. Temporal and spatial combined is tough if you're not familiar with the subject. And now that I see it, I understand. Where they're saying, all right, here, this cluster is the first tweets of the day for people. So they tend to spend between 2 hours in a day between tweets. Like I go to sleep, I wake up 8 hours later, and then maybe I'll tweet something. So it's in that cluster. Last tweet of the day, there's a wide variety for people. The color indicates that it's most likely to be closer to midnight. Later in the evening, closer to midnight, you're going to sleep. If it's business as usual, takes about 2 hours between tweets. So time before and time after. But in a major event, people are tweeting a lot more often. Part of it is that this is a logarithmic scale. So you really have to read that axis and understand that, oh yeah, okay, it looks flattened out because it's logarithmic. But in a major event, you have people who are brewing up tweet storms. This would be better in a 3D model? Possibly. I have problems with 3D. Part of it is that I have a lot of difficulty understanding 3D. Especially when it's laid out in a 2D form. I just don't work well with 3D projections. And I think a lot of people are that way. So that's where I'd be a bit concerned. This tries to keep it in 2D, and if you have somebody explaining it, I think it's okay. But there is a lot of story that you have to tell before somebody can look at this and say, oh, okay, now I understand what you're talking about. If you just glance at it, like this makes no sense. I don't understand what you're telling me. So this is a Manhattan plot. Scatter plot displaying data with a lot of points and focuses on density. So for a particular value, basically you have all of the dots lined up on top of each other. So you end up with peaks. And those peaks kind of look like a skyline in a filled out graph. So hence the term Manhattan plot. What do you think, Tom?
This one makes a whole lot more sense on, still not a lot of information there on exactly what you're plotting.
Sure.
It's pretty, but it's not very functional as far as they're talking about chromosomes and logs, but it's pretty, but it doesn't explain
It's a lot
much.
of data. I can see that. I can see that each color stands for data. So I like the fact that it's able to pack a lot of data into a small chart. I appreciate that, but I wish I had more guidelines on how I can read this thing and what the data actually stands for. That I don't think it's doing a good job of.
Yeah, understanding the x-axis, or excuse me, the y-axis, I would agree. If you have that, I think this is
Yeah.
pretty clear. Reminds me of chemical stain tests. Yeah, or chroma spectrum tests. So here we have a 3D caveat plot.
That one
And
really makes no sense to me. I have no clue what they're trying to tell us.
the probability density function of something. So in this case, here's the little explanation. So each stack of that represents an individual experiment, and I just, even after reading that text, I still don't know what's going on here. I have a vague feeling of what's going on, but that's probably just means that I have less idea of what's going on than I really do.
So the last time I saw something like this, I forget the name of the movie. There was a movie in the 80s, I think, on chasing hurricanes.
Okay.
I could actually see a
They
3-year-old
had some charts, so
coloring
it looks like
this.
something to do with that.
Yeah, and I'm sure that somebody who is an expert in the particular field looks at this and says, "Oh yeah, duh, this means this." But
Yeah.
if I'm just coming at it with no information outside of here's your picture, I got no clue. I can't even it's not like, like the time map, I can understand. I can walk through it and piece it together. This? No, no. And again, that might be subject matter ignorance that's preventing me from getting anywhere with it, but I pulled this one up
Yeah.
specifically to say, man, some of these plots are just not generally useful. Here's dense lines. So the idea here is that this is a representation, especially of a Bayesian analysis, done as a heat map.
That one somewhat does make sense, but especially if you look at, if you're interpreting that the time is the year and the month,
Yep.
but because you're actually seeing where it's getting colder during like January 2017 versus the summer of 2013. So that one does make, I can interpret that one pretty
I
easily,
like
pretty
it. I
quick.
really like it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and this also, I think, works really well in, like I said, Bayesian analyses, where I'm going to run a simulation 50,000 times and try to focus in on what those results look like. So if we run it a lot, then we'll see clusters. You'll see a lot of agreement at certain sections in the plot where it gets darker. So for this one, Raymond says a Stephen Few or Cole Knaflick Nussbaumer probably would say this is not clear for the layperson. Yeah, I would completely agree. Not clear at all for a layperson. May not even be clear for most people in the field, even if they do have that info. I think it's just very unclear. This one, I could probably see if you have something which is extremely understandable as your X and Y axes, where time is the x-axis and the y-axis is something that is easily understandable. Like in this case, Tom picked up temperature pretty quickly. If you have something like, say, expected valuation, we could get a feeling for what this represents without having to learn too much about it. I don't even need a legend to tell me that these colors are represent more or denser than the outsides. Check out d3.js for other examples. Yeah, D3 is a great library. You do have to obviously understand JavaScript to take full advantage of it, but D3 is heavily integrated in with Shiny. I know that the New York Times, for example, in their visuals, make quite a bit of use of D3. It's a really good library. Comparative tree maps.
I've seen these in different places and different times and stuff, but they still don't really interpret a whole lot to me. Um, you can kind of, you have to read something, like you have to read the title at the top to kind of understand what they're showing you. You can't just look at the graph and say, oh, okay, that's what they're talking about.
Right.
Yeah, I'm on the same board with Tom on that.
Yeah.
I don't think it's very bad once you read it and then try to understand it. But yeah.
The only thing I see is that when I'm looking at a graph or something, most of the time on most individuals, your eye immediately goes to the graph. So, without reading anything about it. So if it's like the previous one, because of the way they had the X and Y labeled, I immediately caught what it was. I didn't have to go read something to tell me what it is. This one, I've got to go read something to tell me exactly what it is.
Yep. And it has a problem with ability to glance. Like so I don't necessarily care about the categories so much. So I didn't pay much attention to the legend. Instead, it took me a minute to realize that, okay, this is representing number of people. And, you get it from the header, and who reads? Use this for workload comparisons for customer sites and specific work types. Yeah, especially if there is a change over time. So if you have a proper hierarchy, I mean, that's one of the key reasons why you'd want to use a tree map to begin with. So if you have a proper hierarchy and you want to watch it over time, this is one way to do it if you just have static images. Grouping and categorization. Yeah, exactly. For which you'd need a proper hierarchy. One thing I'm not the biggest fan of with it is that unless I'm interested in just the macro level or in trend, it's really hard for me to tell how much did China change. You can tell that there's a big change, but my eye is not able to get a really good rough percentage, and I certainly don't know what the number was at the beginning. So I don't know what the net effect is, except that I assume it's big. Or if you look at an example like Sudan, where Sudan is in here, and it started out larger, and it shrank, but it's really hard to tell what that shrinking looked like. Or India's change. It's not easy to tell what percentage is this. So if I need to know anything more fine-grained than direction and very rough order of magnitude, I'm not sure this is the best visual. Especially when you get down to the smaller countries where I don't even know what these countries are. This is one of the issues that we have with tree maps, is you get down here, what are these countries even? All I know is that they're Latin American and Caribbean countries. Otherwise, can't tell you. Hierarchical sets. Another case where you have proper hierarchies. Now, I think this is a bad version of the visual. Like this is supposed to be, actually, I don't even know what this is because it's so cluttered.
Yeah, is it like dates? Is it numbers? What is it?
It looks like it says set combinations.
It does name, yeah. Yeah, they put it so close that you can't even tell.
Yeah, so I don't know. Just because if this is your average data set, I think this blows out far too much. It's really difficult to learn much from it.
But if it's a family kind of, I don't know. I went through some of this when I was playing with some of the new graph data feature with the SQL Server, and we had some Power BI plugins for graphs, which were like, all of them suck, really, really bad. So when it comes to hierarchy, some of the Power BI plugins look like that. It's like way too much data that it's trying to pull into one little chart.
Right.
And all the writing is little squiggly, and you can't see whose boss is who and what is this thing really supposed to mean, like an org chart, for example, a hierarchical data set. So it's like it looks exactly like that. It looks like some of the couple of Power BI plugins that are there for hierarchical data,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
which do a good job if the data set is really small, like 3 levels with 6 people, and then that's okay, that's what it's meant for. But the bigger
Right.
it is, yeah.
Right. And Raymond says, can't read this. Looks like Enron's chart of accounts. It's hierarchical edge bundling.
That is, I don't know what you call it.
It's illegible.
My child could draw better than that.
I mean, it's mean, but, again, I'm sure that there is some subset of people who look at this and say, yep, this makes perfect sense for my domain. But in a lot of cases, I can't see much more than maybe trend. So I've seen flow diagrams similar to this that work out reasonably well, but I don't think this one does. This is a solar correlation map. Now I need to read the label. Planets are input variables, and the moons are output or input variables that are intercorrelated with the planet they orbit. The closer the orbit, the stronger the correlation. This is somebody trying too hard.
Yeah, that still doesn't tell me anything. Even after you read that.
Well, this is essentially it's a correlation chart, and they're trying to do cross correlation that these two are very tightly related to one another, and otherwise the whole radial setup is totally unnecessary. This is the type of chart that I would look at and say, nope, do something else. You can do this better. This is an upset plot. So this is relationships between sets. And I've actually seen better examples of an upset plot. So let me pull up curated SQL and try to get the upset plot.
Interesting name. And if you didn't tell me that this was, if it didn't have a title, I would probably think this was 2 different charts just placed on top of each other. Like the one below means something and the one above means something. My first impression is not that it's a whole diagram of anything.
Yeah, so here is Laura Ellis, who has a really good article on upset plots. So think of it as Venn diagrams done well.
Interesting.
And I'll give you a quick example, make it a lot easier to read. So you have a Venn diagram, you have your memes, you have your stats, you have the intersection between the two. Reasons to like Twitter. The upset plot shows stats and memes and the intersection size. So 5 points for stats, 5 points for memes, 3 points that sit between the two. So you can think of this as a diagram of size 5, a circle of size 5, intersection of size 3. And what this does is it allows you to visualize those intersections and sizes much easier than a bunch of circles could. But she does point out that, all right, well, Venn diagrams are easier when you have just a couple of elements. But once you start getting a little bit more complicated, here's a bunch of inputs, a bunch of combinations, and your Venn diagram starts looking like one of these things. But your upset plot doesn't explode that much. It explodes some. So basically it's showing different combinations of pairs and triples. Like here's a triple. Here's a pair. So upset plots tend to work reasonably well. I'll drop a link to this in chat because she also has a lot of code around the upset R package. So yeah, I think this is a reasonable visual, but it is something that I'm pretty sure I would want somebody to explain to me the first time. That these dots, once you understand it, it's compact, it tells a lot of story. The specific dot elements tell you which things are intersected. So these are probably R packages, and maybe it's the different sets of people who've worked on different packages. Or lines of code in an app or something. But these are Twitter followers. Okay, so how many people follow different Twitter accounts and then follow different combinations of Twitter accounts? That's what it is. So yeah, takes a little bit of time to understand this one. It's not something I would necessarily throw out at a brand new person, but given a bit of explanation, it certainly gives you a lot of info in a fairly tight spot. Do another one here. Spark bar charts. Technically Spark bar charts.
That one's interesting. I don't know why they would put the blue lines there. Just kind of follow the money, follow where it's going and stuff. So I don't know. Yeah, except maybe that's their sales goal,
So
or something.
The blue line
I'm not
is the
sure
total.
what's the need for the bar here.
Yeah, the bar doesn't make much sense of why it's there.
Right. Why is it there?
Oh, the bar makes the most sense. So the bar is the total sales.
Okay, but why can't you just have the little lines going up and showing you the total sale in the end?
So the spark lines represent daily sales.
Oh, okay.
I did not gather that when I first looked at it.
Right.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. It's not necessarily that easy to follow. I do like spark lines a lot. Spark lines are great if you don't need to know very much information. If you just want to see relative magnitude. Like, for example, in this case, there was a huge day of sales right here, and then it kind of flatlined for a while. Or if you want to see trend, where this is generally increasing, and you see a couple of spikes. So spark lines tell you that type of information extremely well. The bar charts give you that overall aggregate feel, but I agree, it's not necessarily easy to follow along with these. Dot box plot. So I would say for a dot box plot, I like box plots a lot. And these are even pretty close actually to Tufty style box plots. although they still have so much extra stuff, like a whole line. My ribbing of Tufty for today. I like him a lot. I think he can go a little bit overboard. But you have the box plot itself, which gives you an idea of density. You know, it certainly tells you a lot. The min and max, the 25th and 75th percentiles, the median. So you have that spread, and you have any outliers. And to see the density of the individual values also gives us some utility. That we have spread up here, you can kind of get a better feeling, I guess, for somebody who's not very familiar with the box plot. Because with the box plot, you get an idea. You get a pretty good idea, because it'll tell you, hey, half of your values are in this range. And then here's the spread of the remaining values. But it doesn't necessarily tell you where the rest of the values are distributed. Are they all clustered near the edges? Or, like this one, are they more spread throughout? All you get to see is this is the remaining 25%. They occupy the space between that black line and up here. So that was Xenographics. And if you want to check any of these out, they are at xeno.graphics. So I'm going to stop sharing now.
I'm gone.
Oh no, Tom, you're still here. Tom, you've got to survive. Poor Tom. Poor Tom. Sam Squanch got him. So, as we wrap up, I do want to talk a couple minutes about, okay, what does make for a good visual? You know, we had some fun looking at different types of visuals, got some ideas, but I wanted to formalize just a little bit on what I think makes for a good visual. I will say that these rules are neither sufficient nor necessary. So you can have a good visual that doesn't comport to all of these rules, and I'm probably missing some stuff. But it's probably worth talking about. I think one of the most important things is a rule has to be intuitive. It's got to be easy for a person to understand without that much context. Some of the better visuals we saw, like the density map, I think you did not need much context to really understand, even appreciate what's happening there. As you get more context, yeah, you'll understand it better. You'll be able to follow along quicker. But you don't need somebody spending 5 minutes walking you through a blog post explaining what's happening, like with the upset plot. The upset plot does, however, factor in the second rule, and that is compact. So there's a lot of information that's packed into a small space. And I appreciate that. You know, it gives you a huge amount of information without taking up all of your screen real estate. And the more information, the more useful info that you can put in a given number of pixels or a given percentage of a monitor available space, the better off your visual is. So to help with that, really good visuals are concise. They will tell the story, but remove details not related to the story. And in Tufty terms, you know, that's removing chart junk. That's removing things that say excess color, excess, unnecessary line thickness, unnecessary labels, unnecessary elements that don't add to the end product. This will help you make your visuals glanceable. I should hopefully be able to discern differences without having to stare at the visual. Going back to the upset plot, I don't think it's that glanceable. I think it's compact and informative, but it took a while for me to really follow what's happening. Versus, say, something else that gives the information in a in a way that, you know, you can easily view. Consistency. Elements of the visual, they don't change in their meaning within a run or between runs. So this would be, for example, coloration. If I do have that density heat map, I want the outside edges to be yellow and moving into blue every time. I don't want it to switch between colors randomly. You know, I don't want to open up the graph today and the outside is yellow and the inside is blue. And then tomorrow, the outside is brown and the inside is red. And then the next day, the inside is red and the outside is blue. So I don't want to allow the report to define the color scheme necessarily, because those auto-generated color schemes depend on the number of categories. They depend on the ordering of categories.
Correct.
And so if I run the report the next day, I've been assuming that blue means the sales department, and now blue means marketing. And finally, they're informative. They give information pertinent to your end user and describe the situation without losing necessary detail or including unnecessary details. So I'm not including stuff that's unrelated just because I have the data. Like, here's a sales pipeline, and now I'm going to include our SLAs on what our storage latency is allowed to be. I may have the data, but it doesn't fit. And I don't lose relevant information. You know, like in the 3D Kvyat plot, I didn't have enough info to understand what was actually going on there. I think those half dozen points really help us think about, is this a good visual? Does this help explain what's going on? And does this tell the story that I want to tell? So with that, we are going to wrap up for tonight. Thanks as always for tuning in. We will see you hopefully tomorrow, where Rick Pack is going to walk through the Meetup R package and look at some stats for TriPass. And then next Monday, another episode of Shop Talk. Got a few items that we didn't hit on today's agenda, so we'll probably hit them next week. In the meantime, if you do have questions, if you have follow-up thoughts, love to hear them. shoptalk@tripass.org. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Kevin. Brilliant take on the visuals. Thank you. We learned a lot.
All right, sounds great. Take care, everybody.
Bye.